Good to see everyone out this evening. Thank you for being here. For visitors, again, we thank you for being here as well. Hope you feel welcome and come back any and every opportunity that you have. In the reading just a moment ago, 1 John chapter 4, John said something that is very, very important when he talked about love being perfected. And when love is perfected, it casts out fear. That's one of the biggest problems most of us have. I've always struggled with fears within. And they come in a variety of challenges on a number of fronts. For example, many fear public speaking. I've always been afraid of public speaking. I mean, it is a hard thing for me. I've somewhat mastered my fear, but that doesn't mean I don't have it anymore, but I still have it. Public speaking is a fearful thing to some people. Others, they can just take it and run with it, and they're not afraid to stand in front of an audience and talk. But others are, and that's been one of the big things that I've struggled with through the years. Another one that we have would be standing up for what's right when you're the only one. That's a scary thing. Sometimes it puts us in an awkward position. And one of the big fears of that is being afraid of not being liked by people and being tormented by people who don't like us. That's a fear. That's a real fear that strikes many of us. And so we have various fears that we have to deal with on the inside. Talking to people about the Bible, that's something a lot of people I just don't know how to get, I'm afraid. I'm afraid they won't like me anymore. And so sometimes we have to wrestle with ourselves on the inside. When something needs to be done, and our fear gets in the way. And so we have to struggle with that. Everybody has some kind of fear within. Sometimes it's that first, for the guys, that first public prayer. You've been baptized into Christ, and then you rock along a while, and then you get asked, why don't you lead a prayer? And then that fear just grips you, and you think, I'm afraid to. I can't do that. You see, there are lots of areas in which we have to struggle with it. Some people, it's obeying the gospel. And so there are just lots of things, and the application is just wide range, wide open for many, many different things. Fear can sometimes be bigger than it should be. And that's why John says perfect love, that is mature love, when it has gained momentum and it has gained ground, and it becomes the biggest thing in your heart. It's the big principle of all, and you really are, that principle is so important to you that you use that love to reduce the size of the thing that you're afraid of, that you're fearful of. Husbands, love your wives. Well, that sometimes might mean that you have to protect her and die for her. Jesus said, or Paul says that you love her and protect her like Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Sometimes it might be that you have to stand up if an intruder comes, and you must protect your family. Because your love is bigger than your fear, you do it. There are lots of areas at school, at work, where we have to deal with fears within ourselves. Doing something that we are afraid of the consequences. Well, Jesus dealt with that. Jesus dreaded what he had to face. You remember when he was in the garden and he was full of agony, anticipating the moment that was just ahead? He called it drinking a cup and letting this cup pass from me, if it be your will. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Talking to the Father. And he went to the cross facing the most dreadful thing that deity has to face. And that was taking on the sins of the entire world. That was a dreaded thing for Jesus. But his love was so perfect, was so complete, was so powerful, that his love took that fear in hand and he overcame that agony, that dread. He did it because his love was bigger than his fear. Sometimes our fear, we let it become bigger than our love. We can let it become bigger than anything else. And because that happens, it paralyzes us. And so I'd like us to make some observations about how to overcome and how to deal with it. First of all, recognize it. Recognize the common problem of fear. I like this little acrostic. That fear, using the letter F in fear, it just freezes you. It's like you've got this potential to do something. You don't know how far reaching your potential is because you're gripped by fear and it freezes you. Your potential is frozen. The E could stand for it's really wasted energy. So many of the things that we're afraid of really are not even realistic. It's all in our mind. And our energy is wasted on it because after the smoke clears and we did it, we said, I don't know why I was so afraid to do that. You see, it's wasted energy. It's real. The fear is real. But it just depletes us of energy. And that energy could have been used better. But it's wasted energy. Fear, if you look at it, in everything that you've been afraid of and I've been afraid of, and then we mastered it, we overcame it. If we had not overcome it, it would have been letting that fear arrange for our defeat. Fear is arranging your mind for defeat. As you wanted to do something, and you knew it was important to do it, but you let your fear arrange how you're going to do. And you arranged for defeat. Unless you let your love become greater than that. Then you can arrange to defeat fear. Or it is resisting God. It's just shoving God's promises out the back and saying, I'm not going to think about it. Here's what I want to think about. I want to think about this thing that I'm afraid of. And what it does is you forget the promises of God where God says, well, I will be with you. Doesn't that mean something? I will be with you always, even until the end of the ages. Promises like, if God is for you, who can be against you? Those are great things to think about, but what we do mentally is we push them to the back burner while we keep on the front burner things that make us paralyzed, make us fearful. Well, that's common. The reason I say that, because I see all kind of great Bible characters who had this problem. For example, when God met with Moses at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, and he told him that I want you to go to Pharaoh and I want you to tell him to let my people go. And Moses started getting very much afraid, so much that it was freezing his potential. It was wasting his energy. It was arranging him for defeat. He was resisting the promises of God until he grabbed hold of it and did something constructive with it. And then he went, as God told him, here's a rod. Throw it on the ground in front of him. God gave him the tools of success, and he used the strength and the promises of God to help him overcome his fear. Others, like David, I'm sure it wasn't an easy thing for him as a young shepherd boy to think of running in defense of the sheep that he was protecting, and here is a lion about to take his sheep. But his love for his sheep overcame his fear of the lion. His love for his sheep overcame the fear of the bear. And so those were times in his youth where he overcame something because his love was so strong for the sheep. You see, he developed early on a trust in God. And so when the Philistine Giant came on the scene, and all of Israel was afraid to face the Philistine Giant, Goliath, I mean, this is a huge guy. Why wouldn't we be afraid? But David remembered that God had been with him. And he recognized that in trusting God, God is not going to let an uncircumcised Philistine ruin his people. And so David overcame his fear. And he marched right into Saul and he says, I'll take him. Saul didn't believe that such a young guy could take on the Philistine giant. He hadn't even been in any kind of warfare. But David believed that God would be with him. And he used that belief to overcome any kind of fear that might have prevented him, that might have frozen his potential, that might have wasted his energy, that might have arranged for his defeat, that might have caused him to resist God's promises. You see, these are men who had to wrestle with fears within, just like we do. Joshua and Caleb, when the 12 spies went into the land to spy out the land, as they had been wandering in the wilderness all these 40 years, and now were about to have an opportunity to go into this land that God had promised them. The spies went in. 10 came back and says, there's no way, there are giants in the land. Joshua and Caleb came back and says, God promises this land and God will be with us. We can take it. We can well take it with God's strength. You see, they developed a positive attitude, a fearless attitude of we can. Whereas fear always says, you can't do it. You can't do it. Fear always tells us, you can't do that. But your faith and your love has got to be such that it's greater than your fear, so that your faith and your love are telling you, yes, sir, we can. Yes, sir, I can. Well, it's a great paralyzer, and I recognize that. And I think we all recognize that. The Philistine giant put a lot of fear in the hearts of the children of Israel, and they were just afraid. They did not have a man except this young boy David that would come forward to take on the Philistine giant. And you see that a number of times in Matthew 25, verse 25. Jesus told the parable of, or the story of giving out talents to different ones, different amounts, and finally the one talent man. And each of them were to do something. Just do something with it. Recognize your potential. If you got this talent, then you can do something with it. And you can do greater things ahead. But in the case of the one talent man, the man said that he was afraid. And he went and hid his Lord's money. And then he thought, I'll just bring him back what's his. And the Lord says, you're a foolish one. Foolish servant. You ought to have put it into use, to do something with it that would have brought in more. And his fear was what caused him to be paralyzed. You see, he had more potential than he realized, but he let his fear overcome his faith. The apostles on the raging sea, storms came up, and the boat was being rocked, filling with water. The storms were frightening, and here comes Jesus walking out to them in the night on the water. And they were afraid, and they thought it was a ghost. But Jesus told them not to fear. Peter said, if it be you, Lord, let me come out to you. Now, Peter is overcoming his fear. As long as he's thinking that with Jesus giving me power to come out there with him, I can do this. I think Peter did better than the rest of them. But then he began to look around at the storms. Got his focus off of Jesus, this center of strength. And then he began to sink. Jesus got on to him on that occasion, got on to all of them, because he says, wherefore did you doubt? See, doubt and fear, they're brothers. They're linked together. They're almost inseparable. You doubt yourself. You doubt the Lord. You doubt everything. The apostles learned a great lesson. With Jesus, with my mind focused on Jesus, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Fear is doubt toward God. It's saying, I don't believe your promise, God. It's doubting not only him, but doubting his words and everything he's ever said and all the encouragement that he's ever given us about overcoming our fear. It paralyzes us. It's doubt. It defeats us. Faith can defeat fear, or fear can defeat faith. It just depends on which you're going to let be the biggest. Faith can overcome fear if you let faith be bigger than your fear. Fear can overcome faith if fear is bigger than your faith. You see, it's which one's the biggest. And it's that moment of fear, that moment of dread, that moment of doubt, that's when you've got to reach deep down inside yourself and do some self-talk about what's wrong with my faith. How did I let myself get so paralyzed with this fear? And it's because your faith. You're letting something happen to your faith. You haven't been feeding and nourishing your faith. You haven't allowed yourself to overcome some smaller fears to become stronger with the bigger things that come along. Here are 5 facts to face, truths to face about fear. Fear comes before every new challenge to you, everything that's new and different to you, that I've never done this before. I don't have any experience with this. Everything that you face that is a fearful thing, you've got to grow through that. You're challenged by it. It calls out for you to do something with your fear and to overcome it. Fear comes with every new challenge. I remember the first bike ride. Never ridden a bike in my life. At age 6, my brother says, all right, get on. I was afraid to death that I was going to fall over and I was going to hurt myself. And then he pushed me and I wobbled my way and then fell over. Sure enough, I fell over. But then I got to thinking, you know what, I was afraid. I was afraid that was going to happen, but now that it's happened, it's not as big a deal as I thought. I can fall over, and it didn't hurt me that bad. I'm going to try it again. And so you tried. I tried. And it wasn't long till that wobbling, uncertain kind of ride became a more certain kind of ride. And steady. And going and learning how to maneuver and not fall over. But you had to overcome the fear of trying. The first thing you had to do is overcome the fear of trying. Same thing with swimming. My big brother, here I am, maybe age 5, maybe 6, I forgot. That he just threw me in the water. And I splashed around, but after a moment I recognized, well, I can manage to stay above water. I didn't drown. The thing that I was afraid of became smaller and smaller until it totally went away. You see, fear comes before every new challenge. And we got to challenge ourselves. If it comes to public prayer, standing up, serving the Lord's Supper, it can be any number of things. But you got to allow yourself to deal with it on the level of, well, why am I afraid when others do it? Well, it's that fear the first time. It's the fear that comes with the unknown, or maybe I'll mess up. Well, you might mess up, just like when I tried first time riding the bicycle. I messed up plenty of times. But it's by messing up that you find out that messing up isn't that big a deal anyway. Fear comes before every new challenge. The only way to get rid of fear of doing something is just to do it anyway. Put yourself out there. Most of the time, people understand because they've done that the first time and they knew the difficulty. And so people around you are really cheering you on and saying you can do it. And I'm happy you made that first step. You see, the only way to get rid of certain fears of doing something is just do it anyway. Find out how big that fear was. That fear justified? Sometimes you find out, well, that wasn't that big a deal. And you find out that your fear was not justified to start with. Fear will leave you frustrated with yourself. I mean, what's worse? Knowing that others have done it and they were afraid to start with, and fear leaves you frustrated that you didn't try. It's like playing baseball for the first time. And you got all these kids out here who've played it before, but I haven't played it, and they'll laugh at me. That kind of frustration with yourself, because what it winds up doing is it paralyzes you, leaving you frustrated that you didn't push yourself. You see, fear will leave you frustrated with yourself. We must tackle unfamiliar things. Other people have tackled those unfamiliar things. By tackling those things, you make it more familiar now. And you begin to realize that it's more manageable, that I can do it. It's doable, if I can invent a word. It's pushing through fear. And actually pushing through it, making yourself do it. It's easier than staying paralyzed by fear. So push. Push against the fear that may be gripping your heart. On any of the things that we've talked about, and even some that I haven't talked about. We must do this. Reprogram our thinking, because that's where fear is in your thoughts. Fear is in the thoughts. It's in the imagination. It's in not knowing what's out there. It's just not knowing what's there. Well, in that regard, then, let's think about some verses that help us deal with our fears. And I began to look at verses that helped me with my fears. And here are some just out of the book of Psalms. I'll add another one from the New Testament in just a moment. But I want you to notice these verses. Psalm 3, verse 6, the psalmist saying. Now, internalize this. This is the way David or some other of the psalmists spoke after dealing with fear. And he says, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. I'm not going to be afraid of anyone. It doesn't matter how many there are. I'm not going to be afraid. That was self-talk. That was him reprogramming his thinking, probably from days of fear and dealing with fears. And now he believes that he can handle 10,000s of people being against him. No big deal, especially when you realize that God is with me. And who is bigger than God? Psalm 23, verse 4. This is familiar to us all, but have you internalized it and said to yourself, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. God is with me. And you tell yourself that. And you talk to your heart, and your heart begins to believe those kinds of statements. That's when you reprogram yourself from an I can't mentality to an I can. Psalm 27, verses 1 through 3. The psalmist says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even my enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this I will be confident. What? I'll be confident that with God, I can deal with whatever it is I'm having to deal with. Sometimes we have to deal with unusual and difficult circumstances. And our fear tells us, I can't. But your faith and your love for God and your love for your fellow man and your love and self-respect for yourself has got to change and reprogram and begin to tell yourself, me and God can handle this. We can do this. We can handle it. Psalm 46, listen to this one. Psalm 46, verse 1 through 3. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, and though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, and though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof, I'm not going to be afraid of anything. That's reprogrammed thinking. That's the kind of thinking that faith calls for. And when perfect love builds within your heart and your faith is building with that love, it casts out that fear. And you begin to believe, like David, I can handle this Goliath. You believe, like David here, that God is my refuge and strength, and he'll be a very present help in trouble. Trouble is real. but trouble is not bigger than me and God. You see, you reprogram your thinking. Psalm 56, verse 4. In God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do to me. He's telling himself, with God, I'm not going to be afraid of what people made of flesh. And that's all they are. That's all anybody is. And then Psalm 118, verse 6. The Lord is on my side. The Lord is on my side. Internalize that. Be able to say that. The Lord is on my side. Be able to say that confidently. The Lord is on my side. I will not fear. What can man do to me? The Lord is on my side. And I'm on the side of the Lord. You see, those are things that that reprogram the way that we think. When we're letting fear overcome us, we're becoming overcomers of fear. And then we mentioned Romans 8, verse 31. What shall we say then to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Reprogram thinking. You see, that's what Paul meant in Philippians 4:13, where he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Listen to the language. I can. Instead of I can't, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, now we go out. Monday morning is a new challenge. New things that you'll face. Things that you've been afraid of in the past. But now you are equipped and your faith is bigger. If you've internalized these thoughts, you can overcome yourself. Your potential is way out there. Your potential is great. Everyone here has the potential to be a light for the Lord, to be salt that makes a difference in this world. And you're telling yourself, yes, I can. And yes, I will. And I hope that's the case. If somebody here this evening has never obeyed the gospel, and maybe, fear has just kept you gripping onto that pew, and you kept telling yourself, I'm afraid to. Well, if God is for you obeying the gospel, who's against you? If you've never obeyed the gospel and fear is the thing that has held you back, here's a good time to overcome that. And if you've ever obeyed the gospel and then you've fallen, don't be afraid to get back up and go again, to get stronger. Don't let one defeat mean that you lost the whole war. You haven't. Lost one battle means that you've got to get back up and face the next one. And you can. And you tell yourself you can. And I hope that we all overcome the fears that we may have within. If you need to obey the gospel in any way, please come. Let your wishes be made known as we stand and sing.